Hello, my scholars and saints. Hope that you're well. It's Friday morning-ish where I am. There is an event tonight that seems really cool, but it's from 6 to 9, 30 minutes south from me, and well, that would have been so great 10-ish years ago. I don't know. It's just not now. And it might snow overnight. So I don't know. Part of me wants to go. Nevertheless, we are here. We've slept well, and we are ready to delve into something. I was actually getting ready to do a study with me live stream, which I think I'm going to do after this, but I got an inkling to go to Carl Jung's volume 9, part 2, Ion. Did you say it Ion or Aeon? I think it might be Ion. Researches into the phenomenology of the self, which sounds fascinating. Translated by R.F.C. Hull. So I am writing a paper on Nietzsche's suggested practices to becoming our higher selves. And those practices, for me, as I see them, are shadow work, play, and continual self-overcoming. I'm incorporating Jung just because I'm taking sort of a psychological angle, and I want to look at the practices specifically that don't just require the conscious level of who we are, the conscious realm, but because Nietzsche does a genealogy of morals, he's going deep within our past to psychic material that's been inherited and also, yes, reiterated by society and culture. He wants to do this so we can sort of do a deep dig of the roots out and unlearn certain habits, impulses, instincts, etc., and learn new ones. So he talks a lot about this in Zarathustra, or he sort of makes it concrete and real. So if I'm talking about the shadow, I should go to Jung as well, right? Because maybe he's one of the main people, maybe not the first, but the main people, like contemporary psychologists, philosophers, thinkers, who have thought about this concept. It's just a few pages, so I think we can get through it in a video. I have, apparently, according to these highlights that are before me, I have read this before, but it was a long time ago, and apparently I stopped. Now I am personally and intellectually a little more equipped to understand Jung, so let's see what's in here, what's in the shadow. So there is a footnote that says that the material was first published in 1948, so taken from a lecture delivered to the Swiss Society for Practical Psychology in Zurich, 1948, so. And it's the second chapter in this volume 9, part 2. Whereas the contents of the personal unconscious are acquired during the individual's lifetime, the contents of the collective unconscious are invariably archetypes that were present from the beginning. Their relation to the instincts has been discussed elsewhere. The archetypes most clearly characterized from the empirical point of view are those which have the most frequent and disturbing influence on the ego. So I think it's kind of in the sense of the archetypes, what comes from our unconscious, maybe into our dreams, perhaps, or in the neurotic or pathological symptoms that just emerge and then disrupt our lives. It is, in a sense, disruptive and regressive, to use Jung's terminology, but it's for a purpose of healing. So hopefully that's helpful. These are the shadow, the anima, and the animus. The most accessible of these and the easiest to experience is the shadow, for its nature can in large measure be inferred from the contents of the personal unconscious. The only exceptions to this rule are those rather rare cases where the positive qualities of the personality are repressed and the ego in consequence plays an essentially negative or unfavorable role. The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. I like that. I'm gonna underline that again, I guess, because that's one of my points that in my essay, that this takes intention and work. Because one of my classmates in our class a couple of days ago said that, she understands Nietzsche's what he wants, but if it is our responsibility to do what Nietzsche wants, then it's kind of exhausting. And that word exhausting kind of spoke to me. So I think it's now a part of my paper. To become conscious of it involves recognizing the dark aspects of the personality as present and real. Underlining this again. This act is the essential condition for any kind of self-knowledge, and it therefore, as a rule, meets with considerable resistance. Indeed, self-knowledge as a psychotherapeutic measure frequently requires much painstaking work extending over a long period. So, what is the shadow? It's something that is archetypal, and can be disruptive, lives in the unconscious, the collective unconscious. It takes work to look at it, and it has something to do with a dark aspect of the personality. So what does Jung mean by a dark aspect of the personality? Closer examination of the dark characteristics, that is, the inferiorities constituting the shadow. So it's something that maybe seems or feels inferior, unwanted. Reveals that they have an emotional nature, a kind of autonomy, and accordingly an obsessive, or better, possessive, a quality. So it's something that entrenches us, which is problematic if we either don't know about it or refuse to encounter it. So kind of like the only way out is through. So we have to go, and this relates to my essay because I'm using the metaphor of, Nietzsche's metaphor of going through the wasteland. And what does that mean? Emotion, incidentally, is not an activity of the individual, but something that happens to him. Affects occur usually where adaptation is weakest. I think this idea of Jung's of adaptation is really interesting. He says in some of his other works that, there are two kinds of adaptation we need to make. We're constantly adapting to our outer world and our material world, our embodied world, right? If we go too long without eating, we have to attend to that, even if we have a paper that's due. Someone makes us feel a certain way, or we do happen to feel a certain way as a reaction when someone says something to us. We have to attend to that and see how we're going to react in the public sphere and how we're going to cope with that somewhat privately. But we also have the inner world that we are adapting to, or we need to adapt to. And there needs to be a homeostasis and a balance of attention between the inner and the external worlds. And Jung says it is especially the case that when our external world is so disruptive by our emotions, our neuroticisms, compulsions, something about our personality that we are maybe, or it could be like psychosomatic. It's disrupting our lives and we want to cure, heal, figure out and find a solution for. Jung says that that's the point where we need to do inner work because there's something going on in the unconscious. Maybe a memory that has a lot of emotion that we need to somehow work on. And there are various techniques for this. Sometimes you don't have to remember the memory, but you have to feel the feeling and have some kind of event. And Jung says that there are like these clusters or constellations within our psyche. So, some methods will, expect for the superconscious or the subconscious to do the work that it needs beyond our conscious understanding of it. So, so adaptation, very interesting. So affects occur usually where adaptation is weakest, and at the same time, they reveal the reason for its weakness. So everything is a teacher, right? The cure is in the poison. Namely, a certain degree of inferiority and the existence of a lower level of personality. So a kind of personality that can't necessarily cope, right? I was thinking about this the other day for reasons I won't go into. But I was thinking about a type of person who does not have the conscious ability to feel empathy. And so they might, and some of you listening know what I'm talking about because I have explained it or discussed it with you, but we're being general here. I guess about who this is. So, so what will the person do? Because you need empathy to connect to others, just in even casual encounters, right? So the person could avoid doing inner work or attempt to do that by saying, I will say the words and I will act the way that I think an empathic person would act and speak. But that probably feels very challenging and unsatisfying to always have to have this mask or this, I hesitate to call it a performance because it's really a coping strategy, but that person feels they have to do to kind of compensate. Let's call it a compensatory practice. So that is difficult, right? When you can't just do something naturally that you need to do. And, this person might go decades just saying, well, okay, I'm going to compensate on the conscious level. But what that person really needs to do is heal the sort of inner blocks that they have. I don't know exactly know how to say it. Go into the inner world and correct that misadaptation, I guess, to bring it back to Jung's language, and then it will resolve in the outer world, in the conscious world. But it would be a lower level of personality to not be able to express empathy or feel empathy. On this lower level, with its uncontrolled or scarcely controlled emotions, one behaves more or less like a primitive, who is not only, and Jung has said in his other works what he means and what he doesn't mean by primitive. He's not, I mean, definitely Jung wouldn't be using this in like a way where he's critiquing ancient people and thoughts. He does say that being so close to nature and your instinctual self isn't necessarily better, I guess, than being civilized, because of like being held up by superstitions that sometimes can like actually harm your body, etc. Like he has the example of like a fire ritual or something that you were like trying to get rid of a demonic possession or a curse or something, and then you end up like burning your body. I just read that in one of his works. But Jung excavates the ancients and mythology and indigenous wisdom for actual wisdom that we do need. So I can't remember exactly how he says he's using it. I guess just in maybe like a neutral, non-judgmental way. I don't know. I just wanted to throw that out there because I feel like it feels sort of triggering to me when I read that, how he's putting it in this context. So I don't know. I think it's what I'm trying to say, or what I want to say, is that would be like a good conversation to have. Like how Jung is using the word and what he means by it. Who is not only the passive victim of his affects, but also singularly incapable of moral judgment. I love this. Oh my gosh. I want to quote everything in my essay. It's going to be so difficult to find quotes that I really want. Okay. To prioritize them, I mean. Although with insight and goodwill, the shadow can to some extent be assimilated into the conscious personality, experience shows that there are certain features which offer the most obstinate resistance to moral control and prove almost impossible to influence. So kind of like we all have different parts of ourselves, right? Like some people talk about like the inner child. We have parts of ourselves that are a little younger and resistant sometimes to healing, and we have to like kind of like an unruly child almost. I hate to say that, but just maybe like a part of ourselves that is a little more resistant and scared. And so we have to figure out how to communicate with that part and assure that part that it's okay and it's actually good to heal. These resistances are usually bound up with projections, which are not recognized as such, and their recognition is a moral achievement beyond the ordinary. So it takes like a lot of self-awareness here. While some traits peculiar to the shadow can be recognized without too much difficulty as one's own personal qualities, so we might hate the fact, but be really aware that we, as someone might articulate it of themselves, procrastinate, right? So there's a reason that we're procrastinating. There's probably some like false belief that's spurring that on, but to some extent, maybe not to the extent that it really helps us, but to some extent, we understand that. In this case, both insight and goodwill are unavailing because the cause of the emotion appears to lie beyond all possibility of doubt in the other person. Oh, okay, because he's talking about projections. So we can't see it. Okay, so I guess an example of that would be, something that we get triggered by that we don't realize it's a commentary on us and not necessarily on the person. I'm having trouble thinking of an example exactly. What could be an example of that? I guess here's something actually that someone said to me the other day. If someone is, imagine we are employees at a job, we're working very hard, and we see one of our employees, or one of our coworkers, I guess, going off on a vacation, and they're posting pictures on social media or whatever. So we might judge them and say, oh, I can't believe they're just being so careless and irresponsible and selfish, right? We might put judgment words on that, but really, we're probably a little jealous and envious, and that's just triggering the awareness in us, even if we're not we can't articulate it, that, oh wow, I need some self-care. That sounds really good. I want to give myself that too. And then, trying to work through the blocks of why you haven't given yourself a vacation and you're working yourself to death. So I think maybe that could be an example. Put in the comments examples of projections that really indicate something about ourselves. I need help. No matter how obvious it may be to the neutral observer that it is a matter of projections, there is little hope that the subject will perceive this himself. He must be convinced that he throws a very long shadow before he is willing to withdraw his emotionally toned projections from others. So is the problem really other people, or, is it something in myself that I need to address? I mean, that is kind of difficult to figure out, I think, always on one's own. I mean, because I noticed that, because I've been trying to be more self-aware, and I've noticed that I get triggered when I feel, specifically by a colleague, disrespected. Like if they question what I'm doing. One time someone asked in a small meeting, who told you to do X? Which X was just my job, so it's who told me to do? Really, I think she was just in the dark and confused, and no one updated her because it wasn't really relevant to her to know. And she was really just trying to ask, hey, can you update me? She just didn't say it that way, and I felt disrespected, I guess. And it made me angry and upset, and I had to meditate and probably cry afterwards. But I noticed that this happens. And so I could say, these aren't my people. I need gentle people who think about what they say and don't try to try not to offend. But I think it's probably, maybe I try to avoid offending others so much to the extreme that it's unnecessary, the level that I'm doing that. And maybe I wish that I could be more like those people who just kind of speak out of turn, and I would be less sensitive about receiving that if I was also giving that in a way. So I don't know, I myself have to talk to someone about that because I don't know. But I guess that would be a more personal example of how difficult it is to really understand what's going on. Let us suppose that a certain individual shows no inclination whatever to recognize his projections. The projection-making factor then has a free hand and can realize its object, if it has one, or bring about some other situation characteristic of its power. As we know, it is not the conscious subject, but the unconscious which does the projecting. Ooh, that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, something that I think I'm just coming to terms with is that there are parts of ourselves that kind of need to be told what to do. And I think that gets kind of into the realm of parenting. I mean, you're parenting yourself, but if, you can think of the type of parent that you would be if you had kids, or if you're listening and you have kids, I guess you can look at the actual experience. And if there was any kind of decision about, or question, what kind of parent do I want to be? Some parents don't want to tell their kids what to do because they feel like they're being mean or pushy. They want their children to feel free and good. They don't want to make their children feel sad. And I think it's the same. Maybe I saw this one video about an equestrian who was I don't actually know if that's the right word. Are equestrians people who just ride horses, or they also take care of horses? Because this video was about someone who was taming and training horses. And so this person said, you really have to, you can't always be so gentle and loving and nice to the horse. You have to show the animal that you are in control. And that's for the safety of you and the people who are going to get on the horse. Because I think maybe the horse was being trained to be ridden by other customers who came in. Maybe, I don't know. It was a while ago. I think maybe I'm just making a lot of assumptions there about what this person does and why. But anyway, the advice was, it's for the safety of you who are riding, maybe it was just him, and the safety for the horse as well. So it's for a reason. It's not just that you're being dominating or controlling or whatever, authoritarian. That's just what everyone needs. And I think that it takes some coming to grips for me that I can be so parental and tell parts of myself this is what we're going to do. But apparently I'm learning in the specific therapy that I'm doing that's what parts of you want, And I guess you can think about actual kids, children actually do want, there's a part of them that wants, and I'm just thinking about myself when I was a child, clear, predictable boundaries, to be told what to do because there's some security and help in that. And as a child, as children, we're not capable, we're physiologically not capable because our brains have not developed fully in the ways that they need, and we haven't gathered experience to reflect on yet enough. We crave that guidance, that healthy guidance there to help us. So I think that's really interesting. He says the unconscious which does the projecting. Hence one meets with projections. One does not make them. The effect of, so we have to go down deeply and figure it out, right? The effect of projection is to isolate the subject from his environment, since instead of a real relation to it, there is now only an illusory one. Projections change the world into the replica of one's unknown face. In the last analysis, therefore, they lead to an autoerotic or autistic condition, which one dreams a world whose reality remains forever unattainable. So I think that basically he's talking here about, what happens if you don't do the inner work? You're living forever, you're living a life, the example of a person who doesn't have empathy, but realizes that he needs it and wants it. You're living a life with a psychic, I guess, prosthetic or something, something that you're coping, you're getting along in life, but instead of like a more holistic healing that is available to you. The resultant sentiment, this is in French, sentiment de complétude, and the still worse feeling of sterility are in their turn explained by projection as the malevolence of the environment. So it's just, why is everyone, instead of saying, I think a lot of times we use these psychic coping strategies because we don't know how to help ourselves. We don't know that there's hope to heal, right? Maybe we think we have to do it, and we're just unaware of the tools that are out there. So maybe on some level, like, we always know that we need help. We just don't think or try to find that help. But I guess we could also, before we are even, completely self-aware that it's really our problem, we might project this out into the environment. Oh, it's so hard to connect to others. People are never giving me my due. I'm just trying to think in the mindset of my example of person without empathy, because if you don't have empathy naturally, it might be hard to connect to others. And so you might see others as, well, I'm saying the right words. Why aren't people responding in the way that I think they should respond, etc. So our troubles, our minds might be preoccupied with A, B, and C, but it's really, A, B, and C are really about distracting ourselves. And they do distract ourselves, even if we don't know we're doing that. And by means of this vicious circle, the isolation is intensified. So, I think we all have maybe experienced how our little issues in life can isolate us because, well, maybe we don't want to tell other people about it. We don't want to talk about it because we feel really different and it's really embarrassing. And, how hard would it be to come up to someone that you trust and say, I don't think that I can feel empathy, that's like, and I was thinking about this the other day, the biblical Christian sort of, directive to confess your sins. And it's really a wise advice, because how can you start to deal with something unless you can face it, unless you can voice it even to yourself? And if you voice it to others, others can give you the sympathy that your heart really needs, and maybe even some guidance on, oh, my cousin had that, and this is what my cousin did, So you're isolating yourself, which I feel like it's not always great. The more projections are thrust in between the subject and the environment, the harder it is for the ego to see through its illusions. A 45-year-old patient who had suffered from a compulsion neurosis since he was 20 and had become completely cut off from the world once said to me, "But I can never admit to myself that I've wasted the best 25 years of my life." So there's sadness and there's mourning, and I think a lot of us have a hard time choosing to enter into those emotions. But when you're doing shadow work, you kind of have to. You have to expose yourself to the potential shame and embarrassment and sadness and grief and loss of, being, sick for so long and being in this state. And it's I think it's really troubling and complicated. And that's why I think it's important to find a professional of whatever kind of therapy you could benefit from, that you click with and that you trust, to help you go through it. Or group therapy, or trusted friends or something. Like, I mean, the list goes on. But to not be alone in the journey of shadow work. It is often tragic to see how blatantly a man bungles his own life and the lives of others, yet remains totally incapable of seeing how much the whole tragedy originates in him. So I think we all know people who have, like, met their end and never really figured out what they needed to about their inner selves. And I guess that's where reincarnation comes in, right? Like those spiritual beliefs, like, well, if you don't figure it out this lifetime, you'll come back and try again. And how he continually feeds it and keeps it going. Not consciously, of course, for consciously he is engaged in bewailing and cursing a faithless world that recedes. And so I think it could also be like, we could bewail and curse ourselves. Like, you either are projecting it out or you're just judging yourself 24/7 because you are so weak or pathetic or whatever it is, however you like articulate what you feel in your judgment. That recedes further and further into the distance. Rather, it is an unconscious factor which spins the illusions that veil this world. And what is being spun is a cocoon which in the end will completely envelop him. I mean, and one of the, I guess, issues is that I don't know if tools or knowledge about how to work with your inner world are super public and known. And also it's very inaccessible to a lot of people, because once you start researching, if you find something that you think could help you, it might be out of your budget. And so when therapeutic tools are expensive, and when they're not publicly known in a widespread way, and 3, if money is not going in to fund the development of these tools for whatever reasons, then you have a lot of people kind of floundering and not knowing how to help themselves. So I think it's also something about culture and society as well that, like, needs to realize, I mean, maybe we're getting better, you know, with the variety of tools that are out there. Like, what can you do for a child that has autism or ADHD or, you know, etc. Like, there's creative types of I guess solutions. So maybe it's not all that bad. One might assume that projections like these, which are so very difficult if not impossible to dissolve, would belong to the realm of the shadow, that is, to the negative side of the personality. This assumption, that's interesting that he talks about the negative side. I mean, I think I would more say like the stuck, or the stuck side, or the undeveloped, immature side. Immature is probably not a good word either. I don't know, I'll have to think about it. This assumption becomes untenable after a certain point, because the symbols that then appear no longer refer to the same, but to the opposite sex. In a man's case to a woman, and vice versa. The source of projections is no longer the shadow, which is always of the same sex as the subject, but a contrasexual figure. Here we meet the animus of a woman and the anima of a man, 2 corresponding archetypes, whose autonomy and unconsciousness explain the stubbornness of their projections. So Jung, I think, feels that, well, I've read in one of his essays that for men, there's always a feminine aspect of themselves that is maybe a little bit ignored in the first half of life. Like Jung divides up life into like the first and the second half. And then in the last half of life, it's appropriate for men to engage with the feminine, which he describes. I probably have to read a lot more of him to be super accurate on this, but I think he's looking at the masculine and feminine as like the active and the passive, for instance. And so the inverse for women, he sees that women embrace their femininity, their, like, I shouldn't say femininity, the feminine psychic aspect. And then it is in the last half of life when they suddenly like want to start a business and create like products to sell, and or working on their books and etc. So I mean, I don't know if I necessarily like can agree with that specifically, but like I'm not sure we can really like generalize like that. But I do. I'm interested in the idea that we have both the masculine and feminine within all of us, and parts of our soul are kind of, and I guess like you could use other words too, like just the yin and the yang, the active and the passive, like maybe feminine and masculine is too like kind of like weighed down in identity politics for that to be helpful. But there's like these two poles, I guess, that we go back and forth with through and engage with throughout our day. And, you know, sometimes we're speaking in a certain way, but then also the other way is necessary and helpful and healing. And it's just being able to like balance these and explore these two, if there's two poles, what he says is the masculine and the feminine. I think that like balances out a person, but I don't really think he's talking about like identities in the sense that we might today. Okay, sorry. Okay, so the other thing that, because he says that this might explain the stubbornness of their projections, because maybe I saw in this like Instagram reel this Kabbalist that I guess I follow. Maybe I still do. I don't remember. I unfollowed a lot of like just public accounts earlier because I do that to clean out my social media. But he was saying that, was it the Kabbalist? Someone was saying, or maybe I was reading, I don't know, source of ideas sometimes are fragile. But someone was saying that our relationships, our different sexed relationships, might improve if we can work on the contra-sexual aspects of ourselves instead of projecting it out. So, for instance, like a woman might be frustrated and upset at her male partner because he doesn't take enough control over their lives. You know, like she feels that perhaps, and this might be like slightly archaic gender roles, but just it's the example, could happen today, I think. So, you know, he should, in her mind, plan the vacation or plan a date. And he should maybe even pay for the date, even if they are like married, or I guess it doesn't matter their situation. So, but what the woman is not realizing is that it's satisfying and healthy to take initiative for every human being. And so, but she is projecting, like Jung would say, I'm trying to do like a Jungian analysis, I think. Like Jung would say that this woman like needs to embrace her masculine aspects of initiation and really enjoy the times where she can do what she thinks she wants her male partner, her different sexed partner to do. But that's really like the solution to her frustration is not to, change her partner, but it's maybe to an opportunity to look back at herself and her inner world and what is she not allowing to exist? She's not allowing her masculine aspect of initiation to exist. I mean, I think it could be helpful. Yeah, so I don't know. What do you think? Though the shadow is a motif as well known to mythology as Anima and Animus, it represents first and foremost the personal unconscious, and its content can therefore be made conscious without too much difficulty. In this, it differs from Anima and Animus, for whereas the shadow can be seen through and recognized fairly easily, I think because we know what it is about ourselves that frustrates us. The Anima and Animus are much further away from consciousness and in normal circumstances are seldom, if ever, realized. With a little self-criticism, love that, that's very Nietzschean, one can see through the shadow so far as its nature is personal. But when it appears as an archetype, one encounters the same difficulties as with Anima and Animus. In other words, it is quite within the bounds of possibility for a man to recognize the relative evil of his nature, but it is a rare and shattering experience for him to gaze into the face of absolute evil. I think that's kind of an elusive place for Jung to stop in this chapter. I'm like, what? I don't know. That's just not where I thought it would go, or I need something else. But his next chapter is on the Anima and Animus. So I think he was just kind of wrapping up this little short, brief discussion on the shadow with that topic as a transition, perhaps. But yeah, thank you so much for reading this with me. I feel really happy about the content that I may be able to use in my essay. I think that there is so much more to learn about the Jungian shadow than just in these few pages, of course. But I think it gives us a bit of a taste, a doorway into it. Put in the comments below maybe where else Jung talks about the shadow and what you know about it. All right, I will catch you next time. Be blessed and be abundant and generous to yourself.